In this video, we will expand our analysis of the effects of a tariff to problems with equations. We will use the following problem as an example. Suppose that the world price of 6061 aluminum alloy is $20 a pound. The U.S. domestic supply of the aluminum alloy is given by Q equals 10p, and the U.S. domestic demand is Q equals 1000 minus 10p. Assume that the U.S. is a relatively small nation compared to the world market. What is the number of imports? To help you solve this problem, keep in mind that finding the imports for a given world price is similar to finding the shortage at the price. At a price of $20, in the U.S. domestic quantity demanded exceeds domestic quantity supplied. Please take a minute and solve this problem. Under free trade, what is the number of imports? To solve this problem, we will substitute the world price of $20 into the domestic supply and the domestic demand equations. The number of imports is the difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied. This shows graphically what we have done. Next, we want to find consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total economic welfare. To find the consumer surplus, it is helpful to know the price intercept for the demand curve. This is the price when quantity demanded is 0. To find this, substitute 0 in for quantity into the demand curve and solve for P. Now that we know that the price intercept for the demand curve is $100, we are ready to solve for consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total economic surplus. Consumer surplus is the area of A plus B in the graph. The height of the triangle is 80 and the base is 800. Solving for the area, we get a consumer surplus of 32,000. Producer surplus is area C in the graph. It is equal to $2,000. Total economic surplus will be consumer surplus plus producer surplus, which is $34,000. Suppose that the U.S. government imposes a $10 tariff on all aluminum alloy being imported into the U.S. How many pounds of aluminum would the U.S. import? Since the U.S. aluminum market is relatively small compared to the world market, the world supply to the U.S. is perfectly elastic. For this reason, the U.S. consumers will pay all of the tax. Please see the videos on the effects of a specific tax to understand why it is that when supply is perfectly elastic, the consumers will pay the entire tax. So the U.S. consumer will now pay a total of $30 for each pound of aluminum alloy. Plugging $30 into the supply and demand equations, we get a quantity supplied of 300, a quantity demanded of 700, and thus imports of 400. After the government imposes the $10 tariff on aluminum alloy, what is the consumer surplus, producer surplus, tariff revenue, and deadweight loss? Consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price that consumers pay, which is area A plus B. This equals $24,500. Notice that before the tariff was imposed, the consumer surplus included the area C plus D plus E plus F. So consumers' gains from trade has decreased by the amount of C plus D plus E plus F because of the tariff. Producer surplus is the area above the supply curve and below the price that U.S. producers receive, which is $30. This is the area C plus G, or $4,500. So producer surplus has increased by C. Before the tariff, C was part of the consumer surplus. The tariff revenue is the tariff times the number of imports. This is area E in the graph. Before the tariff was imposed, this also was part of consumer surplus. So U.S. consumers pay the entire tariff. It is not paid by foreign producers. Total economic welfare is the sum of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and tariff revenue. Because of the tariff, total economic welfare has declined by $1,000. This is the deadweight loss due to the tariff. It is equal to the area D plus F. The fact that there is deadweight loss suggests that the tariff has hurt the overall economic welfare of the U.S. Producers benefited, the government increased its revenue, but the increase in producer surplus and the increase in government revenue was paid for by the consumers. The deadweight loss represents a loss in consumer surplus that was not transferred to anyone else in society. The costs of the tariff outweigh its benefits.